So, I hate to say this, but Call of Duty's lost its identity, and we need to talk about that because it's a franchise that's been around for 20 years, powered by nothing but Mountain Dew, Doritos, and dorm room sweat. It's a series that truly needs no introduction because both your dad and your annoying nephew have probably played it.
Fuck you! I vote for one in the frickin' chamber!
But I bet if you were to ask them what their favorite Call of Duty was, they would give you completely different answers, and is that a surprise? This guy's fighting King Kong. This dude's running from Michael Myers. Is that a dog? I don't even want to talk about what this is. Is that even Call of Duty? Would you look at that? I guess when you consider that the series has been running for 20 years, producing sequel after sequel after sequel, every time changing the formula, well, you shouldn't be surprised when you end up with a lot of picky eaters. And it's really no wonder that with each new release, fans and critics alike seem to be more upset with what they're given because it's not like what they had before.
Part of the smelly fish family, and I don't like the smelly fish family.
There's really not a better time to talk about this franchise with MW2's beta just closing out and officially being one of the biggest multiplayer betas ever. And it's been in the surprisingly mixed reception of this multiplayer that I think I finally realized something about a franchise I and many others have grown up with all our lives. Despite Call of Duty's incredibly long-standing career, I really want you to ask yourself, what is Call of Duty? To some, it's boots on the ground and fighting in World War II. Others love the hyper competition and just pub stomping as much as they can. To some, it's just making a new friend in the friendliest community there is.
All right. Fuck you, Tim. Fuck you, Tim. Fuck you, Tim.
And there's still countless other ways of describing Call of Duty, but my point is this video isn't about trying to figure out what Call of Duty is and proving which one of these is right, because in reality, they're all true. With every new sequel and developer and mode added to the franchise, just answering the basic question of what is Call of Duty completely changes when you got into the series, and I like to think about it this way. If the gaming industry were a family get-together, Call of Duty would be your dad who brings a new girlfriend who looks a little too much like mom and he's always claiming, this is the one, but only for her to be gone and replaced by someone nastier the next year. A lot of people really like the first ones he brought home. I mean, they were respectable, they were nice, and his dad got further into his career, he started attracting a different class of people. They were a little more stuck up, yeah, but they were more put together. Everyone in the family seemed to love them, but they would never stay. It was through his midlife crisis that dad brought home some weirdos. Some of them really liked dogs, others were really into cyberpunk, but if we just take a second to look at the insane amount of entries in this series, and not only how the game slowly changed as time went on, but ultimately divided the community and developers alike on what Call of Duty even is. So grab some Juggernog, do me a favor and watch that crawler as we go into how Call of Duty lost its identity. Also, please hit the subscribe button. I worked really hard on this. Thank you. It's at this point I want to introduce how we're going to look at Call of Duty as a series. Quite frankly, there are too many games to cover in just a 10-minute video, and I'll be completely honest, I'm not gonna edit that. So instead, I broke up Call of Duty and its releases into some pretty distinct eras so we can see just exactly how Call of Duty got to the size it is and how its identity's gotten so fractured. As hard as it is to imagine, there was a period of time before Call of Duty when people would actually go outside and touch whatever that green stuff is. The FPS scene was ruled by games like Quake, Doom, and most importantly to Call of Duty, Medal of Honor. It's really easy to look at Medal of Honor and think, wow, this looks a lot like Call of Duty because, wait a minute, is that? Oh, those treacherous bastards. The time before Call of Duty 4 is best described as History Channel gone wild. It's just a lot of games set in the World War II era, which obviously was a huge trend at the time, and as we mentioned, there were plenty of games doing it like Medal of Honor. Now, I know it doesn't look like it, but going back to Call of Duty 2, you can clearly feel that something was discovered here. The game added sprinting, health regeneration, and an online mode which, for people who had access to internet at the time, because remember, this is the early 2000s, it was pretty fun. These early World War II CODs were basically a boomer's wet dream, but you can see flashes of every modern FPS shooter in these games. From gunplay to vehicle use to even modded support. Eat your heart out, Warzone. I mean, this is where it all started. To many people, Call of Duty is World War II at its roots. But with anything, the genre was getting stale, and that's when Call of Duty, after 4 World War II titles, decided to take a big swing and move forward into the future, and it paid off drastically with the release of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. Shit, is this game good. You see, the original Modern Warfare was a complete game changer for the series, launching it to heights that no game had ever really seen before. It's at this time period between Call of Duty 4 and Black Ops 2 that Call of Duty solidified itself as not only the king of FPS shooters, also kicking off what many people refer to as Call of Duty's golden age, but what I'm just going to refer to as the rise. It's kind of insane to look back on it, but at this point, every single game in the franchise would sell more than the last, and it wasn't really a surprise. In this generation of Xbox 360s and PS3s, the online experience that Call of Duty offered was new and refreshing. For the first time ever, console gamers in huge masses were able to not only play together, but also interact and become friends. It's in this era that we see core gameplay mechanics that become a staple for not only the franchise, but FPS shooters. Game modes like domination, create a class system, score streaks, etc. The one thing I don't see talked about nearly enough for this era is how Call of Duty and really gaming as a whole was forever interlocked with this new and up-and-coming site called YouTube.
Basically, I do work. Vanis!
I done subscribe to you on YouTube, Vanis!
What first started out as just basic commentary tracks of some guy in Omaha talking about his life slowly evolved into its own cultural juggernaut. It's really amazing how many creators have came from this space. Captain Sparkles, C-Nanners, KYR Speedy, Nadeshot, Vanoss, Keepstar. All these people sprouted up because of these games. But what does this have to do with the identity of Call of Duty? Everything. For the first time ever, instead of just basing your purchase off the game trailer, you could see the entire game without ever spending a cent. I know I and many other people picked up Black Ops 2 purely because of how much fun it looked like through the eyes of Vanoss and his friends playing the game, or Ali A dropping a nuclear, or even just getting tips and tricks from Drifter.
Hey guys, Drifter here.
Call of Duty was becoming a culture all its own online, and that sold more copies than any advertising the game could make. And this became something that only compounded with the addition of more complicated game modes like zombies. Suddenly, something that started as just an Easter egg in World at War blew up. The internet was ablaze with people claiming to get higher and higher rounds, and don't even get me started on all the buzz around finding Easter eggs and lore for the world that players found themselves in. Suddenly, it felt like there was an entire extra game added to your purchase. Going back to the multiplayer, it's through these periods of games that it became even easier to get better at Call of Duty. All of the resources were available to you at a simple Google search. If this creator says this gun's bad, why would I even bother using it? This idea of having a meta in your game starts becoming more widespread, but we're gonna keep that in mind for later. In my mind, it's really this rise of a fun, social, online community that really rocketed Call of Duty to the FPS king slot that it was at the time, but it's really this growing online community that starts to become a double-edged sword as soon as your series starts losing its identity. It's really surreal to say, but you can see hints of that identity loss even in this era with the invention of the dev cycle. I think we take it a lot for granted now, but before Call of Duty, the idea that a franchise could release yearly games was absurd. I mean, games take a long time to develop, so how did Activision do it? Well, they brought in other studios to make games in between each other. And while that definitely fixed the issue in the short term, it laid down the groundwork for a lot of issues to come down the road because, surprise, surprise, two different studios aren't gonna make the same game. Being the founder of the series, Infinity Ward's very slow to change. The art style's more serious, the gameplay is more tactical and intense. But when you go to a Treyarch Call of Duty, the art style's cartoonish, it's more arcadey, it's about experimenting in fun and throwing shit at the wall, and if it sticks, trying to perfect it. They're fundamentally different studios with different design philosophies. And that could be great for keeping a franchise fresh, but when both games are called Call of Duty and released 1 year after the other, you can see why MW3 had the backlash it did when it released. If I was a new player during Black Ops 1, played zombies and loved it, and hoped to have the same feeling game with MW3, I was gonna be disappointed. And that newfound community online that helped build Call of Duty, well, they weren't afraid to destroy it either. I mean, these are people who trained in the verbal arts of Modern Warfare 2 lobbies, and they weren't afraid to show their skills. And this is despite the fact that MW3 is the most successful Call of Duty ever. It's also around this time that we start seeing a very familiar take that all Call of Duties are the same. When you think about it, it's really easy to see why people have this opinion. With only a year to really experience a game before being asked to move on to the next, it never really feels like any of these games really got to live because you knew in 1 year, well, my dad could tell you better than me, but my point is with this release cycle, Call of Duty effectively spread its fan base across each release, but the games kept coming and people stuck with their sides of what they thought their favorite game was. It was a pretty vicious cycle that developed some pretty pointed opinions, all of which came to a startling explosion when the community and developers got pretty spooked by a ghost. Now, everyone familiar with Call of Duty knows how much of a shitstorm Call of Duty Ghosts was, but I don't think people realize just exactly how much damage this one game did to the entire franchise and really changed the course of Call of Duty forever. Much like MW3 before it, Call of Duty Ghosts was following another Treyarch title, and yet again, it was a Treyarch title that was massively popular. This time, Infinity Ward was determined to learn from their lesson and provide players with an experience they would never forget. Now, I'm gonna say something controversial right off the bat. Ghosts is a good game. I'll give you a few seconds to type that angry comment in the description before I continue, but hear me out. The reason Call of Duty Ghosts failed so bad is because at the time it came out, it didn't match what the identity of Call of Duty was at the time. If we're really gonna gonna be objective here, Ghost was a lot like MW2.
Not a fucking word, Bill.
It had super fast time to kill, really solid hit detection, a color palette only Stevie Wonder could love, and some admittedly really fun features like Michael Myers. But this tactical competitive shooter didn't match with the style of Black Ops 2 that came out just before it. If you even just put the gameplay side to side, it's as if you put a leukemia patient next to a cocaine addict. They just don't mix. If Call of Duty Ghosts had immediately followed MW2 or MW3, I think it would have been a hit. But that's not how Call of Duty works. That newfound online community was set ablaze. Creators just weren't playing the game and being very vocal about not liking it. And creators weren't the only ones. It's really here in retrospect that we can see Call of Duty have a huge drop off in players, and seeing the huge amount of negative reception to this game, Activision said, holy shit, change it. Change everything. And oh boy, did they. It's here that we see another studio, Sledgehammer Games, get invited under the Call of Duty umbrella to make their own game, kicking off another era of Call of Duty where boots started coming off the ground. Now, love them or hate them, exosuits were definitely a choice. In keeping with the trend of moving more and more into the future, it kind of makes sense. I mean, soldiers of the future would move around differently than soldiers today. It definitely allowed for more creative map design and movement mechanics, but it was not the most popular decision. And with such a radical change, we really start seeing these different ideas about what is Call of Duty starting to clash. With the new movement systems comes a huge new skill curve that a lot of people just refuse to learn. Players from older Call of Duties like MW2 and Black Ops 1 were just like, the hell is this? They even tried to capture the magic of Treyarch zombies, but in trying to mimic it so directly, it just doesn't feel the same. And on the multiplayer side of things, with features like operatives and skill-based matchmaking added with each release in this era, the social aspect of Call of Duty really started taking a back seat and turned into more of a competitive, sweaty scene. As we said earlier, it took one Google search to get better at the game, and now the average Call of Duty player's skill was kind of getting insane. Every class had to be the best, every map had to be memorized. If you weren't running the best operative, you might as well not even try playing. And some people really love this. I like getting competitive in games too, but in creating a new crowd of people who not only like exosuits but are now hyper competitive, the exosuit era created groups of fans that were never going to be pleased with the same game. It's with this that we start to see a decline in Call of Duty even further, and other games picking up on the innovation. As Infinite Warfare was becoming the most disliked video on YouTube ever, other genres were picking up. It was slowly moving into a time of battle royales, free-to-play experiences, and mobile games, and Call of Duty wasn't the innovator that it once was. And looking at the games since Infinite Warfare, I don't even think that you can say Call of Duty knows what its own identity is, or that Activision really even cares. It's here in the Lost Identity era that we see really some of the most sporadic releases I've ever seen. I mean, to go from MW1 Remastered to World War II, Back to the Future with Black Ops 4, whatever Call of Duty Mobile's turned into, to now the ever-shifting meta that is Warzone, it's no wonder that when a beta like MW2 comes around, you see so many varying opinions from the same community because no one knows what Call of Duty is. Is it a tactical shooter? Is it more of an arcadey social game? Is it a game with exosuits or boots on the ground? Does it have zombies or aliens or Michael Myers or anything in between? Even though Call of Duty does a lot of these things really well, you couldn't possibly make a game that contains all of these interests in one and make it work. As I said before, it's a series that many people have grown up with, and whether they admit it or not, Call of Duty is a series that a lot of people care about and have fond memories of. And with that, we want to relive them. We see our entry in best times in the series as Call of Duty, but when it's a series that's worn so many different faces that what you might recognize as Call of Duty might be a complete stranger to me. And it's here that Call of Duty's really a victim of its own success. It's in its 20-year career that it's had to constantly reinvent itself to stay ahead and honestly just keep up. It's true that in the past, Call of Duty exploded out of the World War II genre and set the stage for FPSs as we know it, but it's also true that in recent years, it's fallen behind and has had to borrow from games like Fortnite, Battlefield, Rainbow Six Siege, and various others in order to keep up, but in doing so, lost itself. I want to ask you this: what really makes Advanced Warfare any more of a Call of Duty than Warzone or Black Ops 2 aside from the name on the box? Let me know in the comments, and as always, thank you for watching.